Hello everybody, my name is Imran Nathani and I'll be walking you through building an AI editor-in-chief using Gemini long context. Before we do that, let's take a look at what style guides are in journalism. Essentially, every news organization has an editorial process that's led by senior editors and editors-in-chief to ensure that all the content they put out adheres to certain principles and practices. These principles and practices are usually captured in a style guide within the organization. Sometimes it's a PDF file, an internal site. Every newsroom is different. Some popular style guides include Associated Press, Canadian Press, and The Guardian. Most news organizations overlay their own styles on these guidelines. In the video description, I have provided a link to Guardian's online style guide. Now let's look at the style guide format. Most style guides are key value pairs where the key is a phrase or a topic and the value is a large unstructured text. This unstructured text can contain basically anything. It can contain just keyword-based rules, some grammatical rules, maybe spelling checks, and even factual information. Also, these guidelines will often reference each other. For example, in the guideline for Governor General, it will say, also see guidelines for Attorney General. The frequency of change of these style guides is unknown. Depending upon the news cycles, some of these may change very rapidly and then not change for the next 6 months. It depends on the news cycle. Due to these factors, traditional model building or prompting techniques get more complicated. This is where Gemini's long context window is really helpful. We could provide Gemini with the entire style guide and ask it to pre-process the style guide, understand it, and cache it. Every time we provide it with some text, it would review the text based on the style guides without processing the style guides again. Next, we're going to do a quick code walkthrough. So first, we're going to install the Google Generative AI libraries. Next, we will import all the necessary libraries, apply the Google API key. Now, these are the settings for our request. So when we cache the context, you can cache it for a certain amount of time. But if you want to hard reset it, so you can set like a version number. In my example, I've cached the context for 60 minutes. This is the instructions to Gemini, which is basically that it's going to act as a senior editor in newsroom. It's going to look at the style guide, provide the output in JSON, explain what each field in the JSON means, and if there are no errors in the it just shows an empty output. Next is we're going to turn, these are functions written to turn the style guide into Markdown. The reason we do that is even though the data is unstructured, there's a way with Markdown that you can add some structure that makes Gemini understand the context much better. So these functions actually turn the key value pair into slightly structured data. Like this. Now the three style guides that we're using is the Guardian style guide that's available on the internet. We're going to use the style guide from the National Center on Disability and Journalism and the style guide from National Association of Black Journalists. The way we set up our context is we first take the general guidelines from the Guardian and Observer, generate them, then we take specific guidelines which if a story is covering people with disabilities, those guidelines, and then we take the guidelines for stories that involve people from minorities and racialized community. So we're going to run that. Now, since this is a really large context, we're going to just still take a peek into just the first 2,500 characters of how the context looks like. So as you can see, this says below the general guidelines, and then it starts with A, and this is the first guideline, and it goes on, and this is just the first 2,500 characters. There are way more characters in the guideline. Then we move on to the configuration of our generation. I've set the temperature to 0, so I don't want it to be very random on its feedback or creative. I want it to be very specific and objective. And the same thing we've done for top P and top K. Now comes context caching. And here we select the model we want to send the request to. We set the context cache version. With this, when we change the version number, it will reset the context. This is the instruction, and all this is processed and cached and saved for us. Next, we look at a small text, and in this, it contains some errors. We're going to ask the model to provide us a response. See, it provided us with corrections where it's saying to replace a spelling check. The one surprising thing that Gemini did was it combined two guidelines. One was when you say 21-year-old, it should be hyphenated, but also 21-year-old is not a boy, it's a man. So it combined both of those, and it provided us the replacement for that to be 21-year-old man. Similarly, it picked up this feedback from the second guideline. The other ones were from the generic guidelines. It picked up this feedback from the second guideline that we provided. Next, we're going to just look at the usage meta of our request. We can see that most of our tokens are cached. One thing that I noticed while developing this was that Gemini ignores stop words, which is like the, a, if, in, and that's the reason why it gets the index, the start index and end index wrong. And this is very common, and in cases like this, we basically run a kind of index correction method. So there you have it, your own AI editor-in-chief. Thank you so much for listening.